remains open, and he's not backed down from the idea of running for higher office.
Maybe I'll just run for Marco Rubio's vacant seat in the United States Senate.
Gates was no longer a member of Congress and was out of the running for Attorney General. The committee's chairman argued it would set a bad precedent to release the report. But a bipartisan majority of committee members believe the report's release was in the public's interest.
With that, let's get smarter with the help of our lead-off panel. Kara Lenning is here, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter with The Washington Post. Dave Weigel, political reporter for Semaphore and former New York prosecutor and civil rights attorney, sometimes Santa Claus, Charles Coleman Jr. I read that report today, and I'm just struck with the fact that he admitted to womanizing. Womanizing, in my experience, is actually the opposite of cajoling and paying for access to women. So, Charles, I'm obviously going to start with you because you are our legal expert. What stuck out to you in this report?
The biggest thing that I was noticing about this is, number one, given all of the evidence that was compiled as part of this investigation, why did the DOJ not move forward with charges?
That is my question, my friend.
I just can't understand for the life of me, what was it that the DOJ did not see that was worthy of moving forward? Now, here's the thing about the state and local charges. I do think that in the case of statutory rape, the age of consent in Florida is 17. And so there are, it's 18. And so there are some big issues if, in fact, there was a 17-year-old involved, as is alleged as part of the investigation and its findings. But the bigger issue is that Matt Gaetz is saying rather smartly, look, I wasn't paying for sex. These were women that I was dating, and I was giving them money because we were seeing each other. Now, whether that stands in a court of law, no one knows. But in order to prove him wrong...
So he was basically saying, I wasn't paying for sex, I was their sugar daddy?
Basically, yes.
Oh, fine line, very fine line.
And in order to prove them wrong, the difficulty that the state would have is that they would then have to admit that they were actually sex workers, which puts them in legal jeopardy as well. So it's a very interesting conundrum. But again, my biggest takeaway, my biggest question is, where did the Department of Justice not see enough to move forward?
I was a sugar daddy, not a John. That's what it sounds like the line is. Dave Weigel, how did we get here? This man was, Donald Trump wanted this man, Matt Gaetz, to be Attorney General of the United States of America. Now his name is splashed across front pages everywhere for this report that found he potentially violated statutory rape laws, and at the very least just shows him to be a low-down, dirty dog.
And a month ago, if you were asking Republican senators-elect who Trump endorsed if they'd vote for him, they were saying yes. He dropped out of the running for Attorney General, not because there was a preponderance of votes against him, because there were 4 votes against him, and he pulled out. He is, at this point, the ultimate example of how Trump is able to put his brand, his hands, his absolution on anyone who is loyal enough to him. That was the way that Gaetz played this. That's the way a lot of Florida Republicans and other Republicans who support Gaetz play it. They believe the fact that you were just talking about, that the DOJ looked at this material and did not pursue a case, means that they didn't have anything, and that Gaetz can walk on from this. They run him back. They want him, if you quote Steve Bannon, they want him to come back to Congress in January and find some way to reveal whatever the Ethics Committee has on every member of Congress. They fully support him because Trump supports him.
Carol, Matt Gaetz isn't going to go away. He's not going to be the Attorney General. But a report like this in every other universe was immediately disqualifying. In 2024, that's potentially not the case. How much is this report going to change his political future?
Significantly, and I think the Republicans who decided at the last minute, Steph, to join Democrats, all the Democrats on the committee, and indeed release this report after Gaetz had stepped down, we're trying to telegraph, we're not going to let this guy sort of sneak off for a little bit and continue to claim that there is no evidence of this material. There's no evidence that he paid women for sex. There's no evidence that he had sex with a 17-year-old and knew about it later that she was 17. They were not going to let him do that out of fear that he would again rise in some way in the Trump administration. Maybe not as Attorney General, but in some other role. I think this report really alters the landscape. I'm not saying that it means he'll never have another job in this town, but I think it alters things considerably for him because he can no longer say there was no there. There was overwhelming evidence in texts, in his Venmo payments, in the testimony of the women, in trip reports that women expected they were going to get money in some way in some of these sex/parties, drug-fueled parties. They expected that.
My God. All right, Dave, new topic. With a month left until Donald Trump even takes office, he's now got new topics. He's talking about the United States taking control of Greenland as well as the Panama Canal. And when I heard this over the weekend, people love to say, oh, Trump's just throwing this out there. He's not going to follow through. This is a kooky idea. It comes out of nowhere. But that's not the case. Because when Donald Trump says anything like this, there's usually some sort of self-serving business angle. I'm guessing there's one here.
Right, and I'm not right there as the president-elect is meeting with people at Mar-a-Lago. That's often where some of these ideas come from. Another more substantive place they come from when it comes to Panama and talking about the canal and trade, that seems to nod at Trump saying he's going to enforce tariffs in a month. You should take him seriously. If everyone in the business world doesn't, and he's already thinking of, I'll say, innovative ways to deal with those potential problems. With all of this, the Greenland idea is a repeat. We were covering this years ago when Trump, with the support of some people like Tom Cotton in the Senate, with other Republicans, believed that it was worth saber-rattling or talking about how to buy the island from Denmark as a threat. Threat too harsh a word, as something Trump was willing to put out on the world stage and to have world leaders think about. You saw this with the Canada discussion last month when Trump talked about 25% tariff on Canada. We started joking about making Canada the 51st state. The discourse in Canada, where Justin Trudeau's government is very unpopular, was unpopular before that controversy, had to respond to this. The opposition had to respond to this. Trump relishes in changing the conversation from something possibly less helpful to him to the conversation and the portrayal he wants to have across the world.
All right, Charles, new topic. President Biden commuted the sentence of 37 of the 40 men who are on federal death row. None of them are leaving prison. None of them are walking free, but they're no longer on death row. They will be spending the rest of their lives in prison. What can you tell us about this? You know,
substantively, I did not necessarily know whether the president was ever going to get beyond the notion of giving Hunter Biden a pardon. But with what he has done here in shining a light on capital punishment and how the death penalty has been misused in our country, I think there is a possibility that this might be an important footnote to his legacy. And
in a positive way.
In a very positive way, because what we have seen regarding capital punishment cases in America is that, number one, they have been erroneous with respect to evidence that has come out and people who should not have been executed. And number two, there has been a significant racial disparity which has been established over and over and over again. And so the message that's being sent here with respect to changing these from death penalty cases to ultimately life in prison is really, really important, because what it does, to quote Brian Stevenson, is it basically says, look, we can show that killing, that crime, that violence is wrong without sanctioning it by the state and killing more people.
But what about the mad world of misinformation? Because commuting these sentences for lots of folks in different media silos, their headline is Biden's okay with a child killer, which is not the case.
Right.
But the headline of he commuted the sentences of these killers. How short-term damaging is that?
I think that in the immediate sense, it echoes one of the problems that this administration has continued to have throughout its entire tenure, which is owning the narrative in the public discourse. And I think that that's a communications issue that they need to get in front of, because, as you've already said, we know that the misinformation cycle is going to come. We can predict where this narrative is going to be twisted and turned. And so what the administration has to its advantage is a head start to say, look, we have the ability to craft a narrative that's more accurate, that's factually based on what actually did happen and what we did not do with this move. And the question becomes, are they actually going to do it and lean into it for the strongest points on behalf of the president and his legacy?
All right, new topic. Dave, let's talk about Mike Johnson. Despite the fact that the government has remained open, we're making our way to March, Donald Trump was not happy with how everything went last week with regard to the budget. What do you think Mike Johnson's chances are that he'll be able to keep this job?
Well, you could tell. I was in the building behind me for much of the week. You could tell that Republicans who were never warm to Johnson in the first place, or saw him as a compromise, but wanted deliverables from him, wanted him not to do a last-minute CR, were losing faith in him. They're ready for some other option. They just didn't have an option in mind. So Johnson has never been a very powerful speaker. I'm not breaking news by saying that. He has always governed at the whim of what Donald Trump wants. That was the case when Trump was not president. That's going to be absolutely extended when Trump returns. And another thing I took away from this week was how much Republicans were listening to Elon Musk and listening to voices outside Congress empowered by Trump over Mike Johnson. They wanted him to fulfill the will of the president-elect and fulfill the will of DOJ. They did not care that much about his own priorities. The fact that Trump wanted at the last minute a debt ceiling increase and didn't get it, that was more controversial. The overall idea that Trump should be running the program for the House, and if Johnson can't go along with it, they should replace him, that was much more agreed upon by Republicans.
The question is going to be, replace him with whom? All right, Carol, before we go, I do want to ask you about Donald Trump's newly announced pick for the #2 post at the Department of Defense. People might not know his name, but they should. It's a guy named Steven Feinberg. Steve Feinberg is a billionaire finance guy, heavily involved in defense contracting, huge investor in actual gun manufacturing companies, bought up a ton of individual family-owned gun manufacturers and rolled them up into a bigger one, private equity style. What do we need to know about this man? Because back in 2016, 17, Donald Trump wanted to give him kind of this big shadow post to audit the Department of Defense. And I remember New York Magazine wrote a giant damning piece about exactly who this man was, and Trump just couldn't get it over the line. There was no public appetite for somebody like this. But come 2024, it's a whole new world.
A whole new world. And, you know, Stephanie, I'm not going to pick on this candidate or that nominee and make it individual and personal, but I would say big picture, he is emblematic of a larger theme throughout the choices. If you had to pick two buckets of emblematic themes, one is people who have a series of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, and worrisome claims about their conduct. And then there are a group of nominees who are problematic because of their vast potential conflicts of interest that are going to be in their face and rolling past them with every sheet of paper they're asked to sign or weigh in on. And we don't know how this particular candidate is going to handle those conflicts of interest, but I'm old enough to remember the Clinton administration and reading the chief of staff's 357-page, Office of Government Ethics form in which he divested himself from scads of stocks and estate holdings because he did not want any appearance of the conflict of interest that chief of staff with Erskine Bowles, who was married to an heiress to a textile sort of fortune. And I'm remembering that moment now, Steph, because how many nominees are going to promise and vow that they're going to divest themselves from that which creates a conflict